I call the Town of Mountain View Council Workshop Meeting of November 3rd, 2025 to order at 6:30 p.m. Will our town clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Mitchum,
Here.
Councilmember Elgin,
Here.
Councilmember Bailey,
Here.
Councilmember Debner,
Here.
Councilmember Dennis,
Here.
Councilmember Lasher,
Here.
Councilmember Unger.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. So on our agenda tonight, we had our public comment period. First, I'm going to move that to after the presentation, just to allow for the topic during workshops. Public comments need to be on the topic of the workshop. So since the topic of the workshop is a presentation that you're learning about for the first time, I'm just reordering that. So therefore, we will go straight into, we have Todd Messenger with Fairfield and Woods with us tonight, and he's here to present the final recommendations on the residential development questions after compiling all the results from the survey. If everyone recalls, the survey was sent out after his study, and preliminary report was published and shared in a meeting. And it was initiated due to community concerns about residential development pressure in our town. The council hired Fairfield and Woods to help the council make these difficult decisions about how best to address the property owners' concerns about residential development pressures in our town. And thank you very much for being here, Mr. Messenger. We appreciate all your hard work, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor Mitchum, members of the council. Todd Messenger, Fairfield and Woods, 1801 California Street, Suite 2600, Denver. We are presenting a 15-page final report tonight. We've provided a couple of copies. Each of you has one. Attached to that report is 5 pages or so of survey results. I'm not going to go through the entire report. I'm going to summarize that quickly. I think mainly what people are interested in is, beyond the folks that came to offer comments and their input during the sourcing for the preliminary report, what does the larger landscape look like? And so we're going to spend some time on those topics tonight. And as a result of that survey data, we've refined and revised our recommendations to include recommendations that we don't think are going to be necessarily loved by all, but they are what we consider to be sort of the consensus positions as much as we can find it. We do realize that there are passionate voices on all sides of these issues, and that some of those passionate voices may not want to reach a middle ground. But we think that we provided as much of a middle ground as we're going to be able to find based on all of the input and the data that we've been able to analyze. I think it was a great effort on behalf of the mayor and the staff to send out hundreds of surveys to every resident and property owner in town. The response rate was more than 20%, which is pretty good, I think, for a mail survey in 2025. And so with that, I'm going to put this back and we'll start on our presentation.
Turn your mic up just a little bit. Can everybody hear him in the room?
As is traditionally a hallmark of one of my presentations, there will be gratuitous animation and slide changes that are totally unnecessary. That's just to make sure that everybody stays awake. So with that, I had a clicker, but it doesn't work anymore. So we're going to rely on teamwork to make this go. Okay, so the scope of this final report, as we were commissioned to do, addresses only the R2 district. And from here, we'll show that R2 district with some gratuitous animation. This is a little bit difficult to see in the gallery, but everything that's the light yellow is the R2 zoning district. So if you give one little click, we'll see a line trace that out. So this is the area that we're dealing with, is predominantly the single family and duplex areas of the town. Go ahead. Development in the C1 zoning district, and give me another click here, is outside of the scope of this report. But we think ultimately significant intensification along 44th Avenue is probably a good idea for the town's economic sustainability and quality of life. Substantial increases in intensity along 44th we think are not inconsistent with the recommendations, nor was that inconsistent with the preliminary recommendations. And as you'll see, they're probably even more compatible today. So a little bit of background, and all of you are familiar with all of this stuff. If there's a consensus that we skip the background, we can do that. Otherwise, we can do this for the record. The Mountain View is a 12 square block community incorporated in 1904, 121 years ago. Adopted its home rule charter in 1972, the same year yours truly appeared. The original plat has 48 lots per block, 24 on the east and 24 on the west, with 16-foot wide alleys, which gives us regularly shaped and traditional block patterns. The typical lots are 25 feet wide by 125 feet deep, but lots have been consolidated over time in groups of 2 and 3 normally. So most of the time now we have 50 by 125 or 75 by 125 lots. So these are generously deep 6,250 square foot or 9,375 square foot lots. They can support a lot of infrastructure. Almost all the lots have an east-west orientation on a north-south street. There are a few lots that were replatted over time on the southern sides of some of these blocks that have a north-south orientation. There are 220 lots in the R2 zoning district, and among them, 32 were built before 1920, 77 were built between 1900 and 1928, 29 were built during the Great Depression, 13 during World War II, 57 in the post-war era, which ended in about 1980, 1 in the 1990s, and then 11 since 2013. So we can see this trajectory where the development fell off for a while, and then it started to pick up with redevelopment in the 2000s and really after 2010. New construction and expansion here in the 21st century has been different from past eras in terms of scale and architecture. We can see on the left-hand side some of the newer things, on the right-hand side some of the more traditional formats. Design standards were adopted in 2001 and updated again in 2019 to deal with new construction coming into the environment of older homes. In 2025, the town retained us to analyze the current code, previous public discussions, and the comprehensive plan to understand the competing interests in town and the issues at play, and then provide a summary of those issues, which we did in the preliminary report. Tend to hold some public meetings where counselors and members of the public can comment on the issue summary and the proposed solutions. We did that as well. We had people looking at sort of visual preferences, if you will, and we took some of that data down. And we really ground through all that. We produced an inventory, which is in your record, but I didn't bring a copy tonight, of every house. My colleague Jackson up north went around every house and took a picture, and then we kind of categorized where that house was. Then I looked at all of the assessor data for every house in town, looked at where it was in terms of assessed land value, assessed property value, and building improvement value, and so forth. We were asked to consider including a survey, which we did, to narrow down on the issues and solutions. We produced a survey. Mayor Mitchum helped us shorten that up and make it a suitable instrument given what it had to do. And then we provided tonight a detailed summary of proposed code changes that address the issues. Now, the detailed summary is not actual code changes at this point because we think we'd need to get direction from council in order to produce actual code. But I think we're specific enough in our recommendations tonight to give you a good sense of what that might look like. Mountain View, as you all well know, is a strategic, highly desirable location in the Denver metro region. It took me about 12 minutes to get here from downtown Denver. That's pretty good in traffic. So in a highest and best use scenario, the values of buildings will be substantially higher than the value of the underlying land. So if you have very expensive dirt, you have very, very expensive houses. Usually at least 3 times the value of the underlying dirt upon initial certificate of occupancy. So a typical property valuation in Northwest Arvada's Five Parks neighborhood, which isn't too far from here, is about 70% or more value to the building and then 30% or less to the underlying land. Those are expensive houses, they're expensive lots, but most of the assessment is given to the building. And that means that that building doesn't need much. You can move right into it. You don't need to do much. Maybe you'll paint the walls or replace the carpet, but major overhauls and renovations and expansions or scraping and redeveloping the lot isn't an economically rational choice. The house is in really good shape. It's almost new. And that's why it assesses that way. As the value of existing buildings decreases, though, the redevelopment pressure increases. So when we start to see land values that are higher than building values, at some point, it may make sense to scrape off that building and then build something that's worth 3 times the land again. So you have 70% of the, well, roughly 3 times, you have 70% of the value back into the building. And when you get to a point where the demolition cost is justified by the new investment it's not surprising that things get scraped off. Now, when we look back at the history of development in Mountain View, we can see that most of the homes are more than 50 years old, and they're modest in size on big lots in an area where development pressures are high. So it's not surprising the market pressures that we have. Next. So more than 94% of the lots in R2 were improved more than 50 years ago. Several areas, I'm sorry, there were several eras in Mountain View's history where reinvestment in homes was not very common. Some of the homes started to fall apart. Some of the homes have weeds in their yards, trash, and other things. Some of the homes are in relatively poor condition with asbestos, lead, structural issues, other conditions that can make upgrades difficult. So then when the property owner is faced with a choice, do I renovate or do I scrape and redevelop? That comes into it too. So the demolition costs are higher, the remediation costs are higher, but the cost of going in there and remediating and then restructuring the inside or remodeling the inside is even worse. Sometimes it's easier to just haul everything away. About 82% of the 220 lots in the R2 district are ripe or almost ripe for redevelopment. 102 of them have land values that are 50% or more of the total value. That's a lot. 79 have land values that are 40 to 50% of total value, which means they're on their way towards that redevelopment if they're not already there. I mean, somebody's economic decision may be, I do it now, I can make it work now. It really depends a lot on the redevelopment costs that are involved. Next slide. So currently the town, so moving from sort of the current conditions to what is the town doing now, I'm going to very quickly summarize what the town's current zoning regulations do. I don't want to go through every last provision. The report actually does go through all the things that matter in terms of things that we're talking about. But right now, in terms of building size, which seems to be the biggest issue that we were asked to confront, on a 50 by 125 foot lot, which is 2 of the standard town lots, 2,500 square feet are available for a first floor. So a 2-story building would be about 5,000 square feet. A 2.5-story building, I think you can build 75% of the floor below. So you're pushing over 6,000 square feet on a 2,500. I'm sorry, on a 5,000 square foot. Not on a 5,000 square foot, on a 50 by 125. On a 75 by 125, you can do a lot more, 3,750 square feet on the first floor. So then you get to 7,500 square feet, and then you're pushing probably closer to 9,000 square feet or more when you get a 2.5-story building on a lot like that. So those are big homes. Go back one. Did I miss something? Yeah, so that's the half story is allowed. We don't know what a half story is, but a half story is allowed. We do know that it can't occupy more than 75% of the floors below. But we don't know how half stories apply like on a flat roof building because typically an architect would think of a half story as under a sloped roof form where the walls are not terribly visible from the outside and usually have a dormer. So you have a bunch of 1.5-story buildings in town with traditional styles. Okay. So landscaping, we don't spend a ton of time on landscaping, and we didn't spend any time on landscaping in the survey, but just to know, like, you can tell the difference. If you have street trees, it makes a big difference in terms of hiding building mass, in terms of quality of life, in terms of creating outside enclosures. You have a great street tree program now. Our recommendation is keep doing that. And landscaping is an important aspect of your community character. So your current code requires a tree in the front yard or a street tree lawn and 30% permeable landscaped area on the lot. Probably you should consider continuing to do that. Okay, so you notice that flash transition? That means we're in the good stuff. So if everybody's awake, okay. So there were 330 surveys, which accounts for each lot, and then owner who may be off-site or in another town, and then residents. And I know we have some multifamily, so we got, I guess, surveys out to every single person. 71 of those were returned, so the response rate is 21.5%. Those were delivered to our office in their original envelopes, just a big stack of envelopes. So we went through and we verified the count. We looked at the envelopes. Most of the envelopes were in great shape. Some of the envelopes were a little tore up like you'd expect from the post office. Nothing untoward as far as we could tell. I think 4 of the surveys were copies, which was it 4? Yeah, it was 4 surveys. Somebody had lost it and asked for another copy. When we looked at those, we included them because number 1, they didn't change the result. And number 2, there was no appearance that they were copies by the same owner with the same information in them. So we had pretty good confidence that it was worthwhile to include those 4. The survey had one who are you? Are you a resident, a property owner, or both? Question, and 13 multiple choice questions about development and Mountain View. And it provided space for comments, and we got comments. The comments are summarized in the survey results, which is the 8.5 by 11 with the staples. We did not edit the comments. We'll just leave it at that. So next. The first answer, 54.9% of those who responded were both a property owner and a resident. When we're talking about these percentages, this is the percent of total surveys returned. Not everybody answered every question on every survey. So no answer is an answer in our view, and that brings us to 100%. If you see something here that says no answer or doesn't have no answer, it's because there were 0 no answers, but I think I might have written that on all of these. Bottom line is 50, when I say the percentage, it's of those who of total surveys. So here, 2.8% didn't answer, 54.9% were both property owner and resident. I have a strong suspicion that the property owner in Mountain View question was answered as, I'm a property owner, I can move on. And probably a lot of those actually live here too, but I don't know that for sure. Okay, next one. Should the town limit the size of new or expanded homes beyond the current rules? 50.7% of those who responded said no. So that was, I think, different from the sort of energy that we had in the room when we came out. But I think there were a lot of people that didn't come out that then responded in a different way in this survey. 39.4% said yes, 7% were not sure, and 2.8% didn't answer. In response to the question, do you think that the current size rules are too strict? 35.2% said yes. 32.4% said not strict enough. 22.5% said about right. So while too strict was the plurality, the majority of this, if you will, you can see that there's a balance there that is very, very close. Two were not sure, 2 didn't answer. Next question. Current maximum home height is 2.5 stories or 34 feet. Do you think that's too tall? About right. Too short? 43.7% at about right. Smaller variation around that, the too tall and the too short. 28.2% at too tall and 26.8% at too short. 5 people didn't answer this question, which was surprising to me, and 1 was not sure. But about right, I think, is where we land there as the equilibrium point on that question. Should pitched roofs be allowed to be a little taller than flat roofs? Overwhelmingly, yes, 71.8%. There was nobody that didn't answer that question. 6 people weren't sure, but I think we're pretty confident that pitched roofs should be favored in terms of architecture. And given that half stories are typically located under pitched roofs anyway, our recommendations reflect that in allowing that half story above the second story on a pitched roof building. We don't think you should be thinking about half stories because it doesn't actually function architecturally on a flat roof building. So we recommend bringing those heights down. The other piece of that, which isn't said in the presentation in the report, that a blocky flat roof building that's 34 feet tall is going to be more likely to impact sunlight than something that has a slanted roof where the slant goes down to the north side. So just some thinking. I'm not sure how half stories were implemented before. Maybe it was just if you had 75% of the second or the above the second floor, that was considered a half story, whether it was architecturally a half story or not. I don't know. We just recommend defining it. If there's some additional pressure to say you can build a third story that is 75% of the floor area of the second story, that would be a different consideration. Right now, as it were, the language prompted us to go down that other road. Do you think maximum home, should pitch roofs, 71.8, we can move to the next one, sorry. Should zoning rules protect backyard privacy, for example, by limiting second floor window placement? 50.7% of respondents said yes. 5 people were not sure, 29 said no, and 1 person didn't answer. So I think 50.7 is actually a majority of those who responded to the survey instrument. So privacy, we heard that over and over again as something that people valued. And it looks like people value privacy in their backyard more than their individual right to put windows on the sides of their buildings. Should zoning rules help protect sunlight in backyards? Again, 63.4% here said yes. So regardless of building height, if we can do design controls that help with sunlight in the backyard, that's something that we should be considering, and you'll see that in our recommendations. Next slide. To protect sunlight in backyards, should the home be allowed to be closer to the street? 49.3% said yes. 10 people weren't really sure. We tried to provide some diagrams in our preliminary report about how that could work. And so that's kind of what we're thinking. Perhaps we need to illustrate that a little bit better, but the idea being if the big massing part of the building is closer to the street, then as the sun travels across the sky, you will have more opportunities in the afternoon and right before afternoon to have to have sunlight in the backyard of the next door building on the north side in the wintertime particularly. And in terms of limiting the maximum size of a home based on the side of the lot it's built on, 56.3% said yes. So even though the responses were that, the town shouldn't be more restrictive, the town regulations, it looks like people say should be tied to the size of the lot. So that suggests to us a floor area ratio, which is actually kind of more helpful in terms of if you're going to build a two-story building, it's going to have a smaller footprint. If you're going to build a one-story building, you could have a larger footprint. And I think that maybe takes care of some of the massing issues that occur. So no said 26. 3 people were not sure. And I think actually FAR is a pretty complicated question, but I think it was informative. Should the town limit the maximum size of a home? Oh, this is where we just were, sorry. Should more than one home be allowed on a lot if there's enough parking and the total size is within the same limits as a single home? So for example, if you're allowed to have 6,000 square feet of floor area, you could have 3 homes at 2,000 apiece. Yes, overwhelmingly, 77.5% of the people said yes. We would like to see multiple units on a lot. Maybe that's accessory dwelling units, maybe that's duplexes, maybe that's a bunch of little cottages, whatever it might be. If there's room and you can park it, you can do it. That also, by the way, that last question provides the opportunity then to leave an old house in place and build new houses around it, which is an interesting way of sort of preserving the history, but allowing for new economic use of the property. There was a question, we thought we would have had a different response to this in terms of the numbers, but we originally believed there was no appetite for architectural controls. Should new homes be required to generally match the look and feel of Mountain View's older homes? 25 people or 35.2% said yes, 52.1% said no, 7 people and 9.9% were not sure, and 2 people didn't answer. We got the sense that there was no appetite at all. There's a little bit of appetite, but it's not enough to make us suggest that you actually do it. Should homes that are close to the street be required to have a covered front porch? Again, to that point where there didn't appear to be any appetite to control architecture, 70.4% people said no. Should the town allow a flexible review process for buildings that don't meet every rule but still fit the neighborhood? So instead of having a variance which is based on hardship, since all the lots are essentially the same, it's very hard to prove an actual hardship when you're doing something that doesn't comply with the regulations, particularly when you're scraping something off and redeveloping it. But if you had to look at it in context and say, is this going to work anyway? A process like that wouldn't require you to make demonstrations and sort of pass it along with a wink and a nod. There's overwhelming support for this at 74.6% of respondents. So in terms of priorities, these are not surprising. Homes that create privacy issues and homes that block sunlight, you recall those were majority views, I think, or high plurality views that we should regulate for those things. And so those seem to be the priorities that most people indicated. Now, to be fair, I just want to, in the interest of full disclosure, we asked people to pick 2. I think there were 2 or 3 respondents that picked more than 2, and we just counted those because it wasn't enough to worry about it. So, remember that when you're answering a survey, try to pick 2. Sometimes the person reviewing the survey won't be that generous. They'll just throw your results out. We did not throw those results out. What's interesting here is that there were 31% of respondents didn't answer any of those, which suggests that what they're really saying is we don't think any of those should be priorities. And I think it's fair to say that many of those that didn't answer any of them, if they offered comments, those comments were, don't tell me what I can do with my property, or something along the lines of, I should have the freedom to build whatever I want. Some of them were a little bit more restrained than that, but that, these are not priorities for them. We saw kind of on both sides. We don't want big buildings. We don't want to be told what to do. We were not surprised by that result. Okay, so that's the survey results. Does anybody have any questions about survey results? Okay. What does that mean for recommendations? The preliminary report had a number of recommendations that were, I think, not necessarily in line with the survey results, but I think they were in line with the public participation we had to date. So at this point, we have walked back some of the recommendations, deleted some, taken some of the suggestions out, and then taken other suggestions and turned them into recommendations. So the first thing is we didn't originally recommend a floor area ratio standard. Now we think a floor area ratio standard is the way to handle building bulk height. Floor area ratio is a good way to do it. We don't think that lot cover is good because lot cover requirements really encourage maximizing the height. Whereas floor area ratio says you get a certain amount of floor area, you build it the way you think you want it. And we can make the floor area ratios high, but so that it's not real invasive in terms of what people want. But it does give them the opportunity. You can build more on one story if you want to be one story, or you can build less cover and higher if you want to do it that way. And particularly if you want to build it towards the front of the lot and protect your neighbor's sunlight, even better. We recommend defining half story, including the allowed amount of side building wall visible above the second floor. So basically what that means is, a lot of half stories, I'm standing on the floor, that outside wall comes up to here, and then the roof system starts to come in, and then you'll have a dormer. And in the middle of that space is where you have the sort of the headroom to move around, and usually we put storage under the other angles. So the amount of wall above the floor is important in terms of what the half story means for building height. Anywhere between 2 and 5, 6 feet is a good measure. Different jurisdictions use different measures. We've discussed that in our preliminary and final reports. Change how height is measured to encourage sloped roof systems. If we measure to the midpoint of a sloped roof, then we're not penalizing somebody for having a steep slope on their roof. If we don't measure that way, then we are taking away floor area when we do that. And if we measure flat roof systems, we measure the top of the parapet, which sort of discourages flat. I'm not saying flat is bad. I'm saying that in terms of the way the building formats, we just don't want them to be super tall so that their peak is at the same peak as a sloped roof building, if that makes sense. Reduce the maximum height for buildings with flat roof systems is the corollary of that. And that's because they can't by definition include half stories and because there's a community value to preserve sunlight on the adjacent properties to the north. The next recommendation is to divide lots into 3 areas for the purpose of bulk and height restrictions in order to preserve the sunlight in the backyard. So this, you increase the north side setback, you decrease the south side setback, and you decrease the front setback. And as you can see, these lots are actually angled so that they face a street on the upper right-hand corner. And then the areas, and this is 3 lots, the middle one is undeveloped. And so you can see how we've drawn the lines there, and you can see how dividing the building mass to the front of the lot on the winter solstice allows for sunlight to reach the middle of the lot on the lot to the north. So north is up to the upper left and east is the street, if that makes sense. And you can also see how changing the side setback in the first 2 graphics there makes a big difference in terms of where the shadow goes. And in your current code, you have a cumulative side setback. So you can have a short one on one side and a bigger one on the other, and you can sort of move around. But as we move the house to the north, we increase the shade impact on the property on the north side when the sun is in the south sky in the winter. So you're about actually to experience this, coming up here in the next couple of months. The next recommendation is to repeal the current bulk plane regulations and then recalibrate those side setbacks based on that prior slide so that homes sit closer to the southern side lot lines. Now, keep in mind, obviously, that none of this matters for existing houses. Existing houses are going to be what they are. You can't make people just pick up and move their house just because you change your code. It's only when people want to do something. And in terms of non-conforming buildings, you can't make it worse. So you can still build onto your non-conforming building and do whatever you're going to do, consistent with the code. But you don't have to tear down a building just because it's non-conforming and you want to expand it. Reduce the front setback from 20 feet to 10. And as you saw on that solar access in the prior slide, that will not only provide that additional solar access, it may have some benefits in terms of street enclosure, that feeling that the street is a room where you can be comfortable and walk around. Allow development of multiple homes on a single lot, provided that the total development complies with the floor area ratio, height, and setback restrictions, and there's enough room for parking all those units. Next, allow duplexes in the same manner as single unit homes. The town's done that in the past. We don't see any reason to say you can build 3 or 4 units that are detached from each other, but you can't build duplexes. That doesn't make sense to us. A duplex works just as well. We know we can get them parked. We know we can make them look nice. So we recommend just letting duplexes happen, subject to the same FAR requirements and so forth. Also, requiring second floor windows on the sides of buildings to be frosted glass block or 5 feet above the floor for the privacy in the backyard of the house next to you. That may be, only in that middle section of the lot, or it may be in the front and middle section of the lot. That'd be something to decide later. But, see how that one percolates. Those are ways that we can protect that privacy while still enjoying the sunlight that comes through windows. Update the landscaping regulations to reflect state objectives. This isn't based on survey data. We just think it's a good idea regarding water conservation and the reduction of microplastics and forever chemicals in runoff. This is about artificial turf, that last part, not about your natural landscapes. Hopefully your plants aren't releasing microplastics and forever chemicals. Next, to create a process that's not a variance for approving designs that don't strictly comply with new requirements. That process should allow for the consideration of context rather than an individual property owner's hardship. And it should promote quality architecture and innovative, contextually appropriate solutions, which basically means, hey, that really fits nice there, or it really fits nice for what we have planned there. So as you figure out what's going on along your commercial corridor, and if that's going to get big intensification and so forth, then the things that are right next to that might serve as a transition down into the neighborhood, maybe more at those locations. Certainly their northern neighbors, being big mixed use buildings or big commercial or apartment buildings or whatever, they're not going to mind the shade if you build a bigger house right next to that. That's it. That's in a nutshell, kind of what we found. We appreciate the participation. We thought was amazing. And we were very happy to be able to provide this analysis to the town of Mountain View. I'll stand for any questions that the council may have.
Can open the floor for council to ask questions of Mr. Messenger or requests for clarifications.
I have no questions. I thought it was very clear. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Appreciate all of your hard work and the effort that went into this and the presentation. Thank you. We will now go back to our public comment time period. If anybody has signed up for public comments in the room, our clerk will call them in the room first. Nobody's signed up. Do we have anybody who's participating remotely who would like to offer a public comment?
We have one participant.
So they can sign up in the chat with their name and whether they're a resident or not, and their address. And then our town clerk will invite them to be a panelist, which will allow them to turn on their mic and turn on their camera for the duration of a 3-minute comment. And the town clerk will call their name when this is ready.
Do we have Lisa Mora?
Lisa Morath, you have the floor.
My only comment is it would have been nice to have had that presentation presented to those who are online. Sitting here just watching the gentleman speak was not very useful and not being able to see the presentation. So it'd be nice if you guys would be a little aware of that for those who are online, a little more conscious of those that are here wanting to participate remotely. Thank you.
Thank you. Shall we speak to that? Do you wanna
So
address that?
when I broadcasted it online, it had it reversed and it had it backwards, which was very confusing. So that's why I stopped presenting it.
Yeah.
It's an
that was the
IT thing
goal.
we need to get fixed.
But when we present, what the goal is that we will present this, we will take the whole presentation and put it beside the PowerPoint presentation and have it on the front page of the website so that everybody can see the presentation beside the PowerPoint presentation. But the aim had always been to have it presented to remote participants at the same time. We just had it reversed, so it didn't work. But it will when we get it on the website. So thank you for everybody's participation. And we'll go on to our next agenda item unless council wants to have any. Okay, sorry. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
Okay, so the next up on our agenda is this land use code project. I wanted to have a little conversation about this particular project because the project has some questions about the timeline, where originally at the last meeting, or I don't remember if it was it was the meeting in October, I believe. We had a
October 20th.
October 20th meeting. We had a schedule for the land use project, which is the whole comprehensive land use and zoning code project. And council approved that schedule of meetings. And when we're working on the grant money, we realized that.
So I got notification on the 22nd that we were awarded the DOLA grant for the land use project. When I returned all of our information to DOLA to get our contract with them going, I had requested an expedited grant contract. The problem is every year they have very, very few requests for expedited contracts except this year. And we have 3 other municipalities ahead of us wanting to get an expedited contract, which means that we're looking at a 4 to 12-week timeline to get the contract in place. If we start work on this project prior to having an executed contract, then we will not receive the matching funds. So the purpose of having to push this back is to make sure that we get our 50% match from DOLA. Make sense?
So then we're proposing in your packet, there's Exhibit B, which is the proposed timeline. And that is the most, that's the safest timeline because they told us, I think 12 weeks is like the latest.
4 to 12 weeks. So we're trying to play it safe because we would really like to receive all of our matching funds.
So I'm hoping to get approval from council and we'll bring this back if there's needs to be more discussion at another, like if suddenly DOLA said, oh, we got this expedited and we could start it sooner, we'll look at that again and say, maybe we should start it sooner and bring it back. We're trying to be nimble here, basically. But allowing it to start a little later also gives us time to make sure that everybody gets it on their calendar and we talk about how we're going to have these conversations, because the most important part of this project is that we have community at the table. And in our workshops, we're typically in this kind of setting, and community has a short time period where they can have their comments. And so one of the other questions that we want to talk about is how do we go about, other than publicizing the calendar ahead of time and getting flyers out and talking about it on social media, how do we invite the residents and the property owners to the table in these conversations that we're going to have over a series of months? And I don't want to make that decision by myself. I think council should make the decision about how do we talk about this project and how do we format it to include the residents. Because when we talk about the project, we also use a very technical term, land use and zoning. And I think a lot of people don't know what that means. We want to inspire the community to come and interact with us all along the way during this project. And I think if we call it something a little bit more catchy, as what's proposed in your packet, Mountain View Code and Charter Project, MVCC, something like that, then we've kind of got we've got like a tagline that we can use to help educate everybody about the work that we're doing and kind of brand it the way that we've done with Mountain View Cares About Safety. We did that so that people understand what we're talking about when we're working on that project. So I just kind of wanted to hear from council about how they felt, how you guys feel in terms of both branding it and naming it, and getting community members to the table, and then the format for the physical setup of the meeting. Do council members have any thoughts on those two questions? Councilmember Unger?
I like the code name for the project to be Mountain View Code and Character Project. I think that's more explicit than the other two. They're more vague. So I prefer that one. And I can't see any harm in keeping the 12 weeks. We want to keep the people happy that are giving us the money and keep it in that order. If we try to make it, it will hurt us if we go ahead sooner, is my understanding.
Thank you. One of the topics, when we've been talking about this, sometimes we've been referencing Morrison because Morrison did a similar project and with our town attorney, because he's also their town attorney. And speaking of which, our town attorney is participating remotely during workshops from now on, unless council requests his physical presence. And when we talk about how we're doing this in a similar way as Morrison did, we're not talking about, we're changing the code to reflect it to look like Morrison's code. I had some questions about that over the weekend. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about we're using a similar process. And so I did talk with Morrison about how did they handle the process of the meetings, the workshops that they held. Did they have it set up like a regular workshop? Or did they have a big conference table where everybody sat together around the conference table? And what I learned was that for the first meeting, the launch, they had it set up where the community members were in a circle with the council. And the community members joined that circle. And that was for the launch. And then after that, they went back to the standard workshop setup, which is similar to ours. And that they had a lot of participation at the beginning of the process and then a few less every meeting. And by the end, not many residents were participating. So how do people feel about, like, how do we, if I said we're going to have a big round table, a big conference table in the middle of the room, and the residents are going to join on one side and council's on the other side, but we're all at the same table, how would that land for council? Like, is that what we want to do, or do we want to do something? Is there some other creative way to handle? What if there's another idea that came to my mind was we could have the regular workshop set up so that we don't, because just setting things up is difficult. You can imagine all of this. And we want to make sure we have a recording and people who are participating remotely can participate as well. So one other idea was we have the standard setup, but we have public comment periods before council makes decisions and gives thumbs up on different things. Because we'll be moving in sort of a informal way through a lot of material quickly. We're going to say, the town attorney will walk us through this whole process. And Austin, correct me if I get any of this wrong, but there will be questions about, do you want to do it this way or this way? Where do we fall? And then he'll move that once he gets a consensus, that concept moves forward. And so my sense is that this council is going to want to hear from the community before they make those decisions and move it forward. They're not making a formal decision. They're making an informal decision because it's a workshop. There's no votes, but we want to get to the end of this process. The goal is to get to the end of the process with community and council feeling comfortable about where we landed, so that when you're at the first reading, there's not a lot of discomfort. We've talked through it all. That's when you're making that formal decision. But in order to get to that place, we really need to think carefully about how we proceed and how we prepare ourselves for this process. And then how do we sustain that level of involvement? So whether it's just basically marketing and then, you know, to communicate that how important this project is and what we're doing and give it kind of a tagline. And or we have additional opportunities for public comment during the process. Or I want us to think about it. Mayor Pro Tem.
I definitely think we should have multiple opportunities for the public to engage, and I think that would make it a little bit less sort of formal, but will help, you know, with the setup, you know, and not drastically redoing the setup and trying to find a conference table that will suit us and finding out that it won't work well or what have you. But I feel like if we have people, you know, who can, maybe they can only show up for a portion of the meeting, you know, given the opportunity to have multiple public comment periods so that they can come and go as they need to, or, you know, if they're late, they can still have their voice heard. I think that's going to be huge.
Mhm. What if we change the public comment rules for these workshops? And because typically, you know, you can only speak once and it's 3 minutes.
Oh, I definitely think we should allow people to speak more than once.
So it's less formal, allow people to speak up. Do you,
I agree.
Yeah.
I would agree, yeah.
The 3 minute might actually be helpful still, just because you might get somebody who's speaking repeatedly for like any length of time, and then that could, you know, prohibit someone else from speaking. But I definitely think we should allow someone to speak more than once.
Yeah, I agree.
okay, so just loosening the public comment rules might be one of the ways in which we can improve this process. Councilmember Unger?
I would definitely be in favor of I know it'd be some finagling around, but of having all at one table. And having I'd like input from you guys, personally, as to you've been sitting in chairs for all this time. Would you like that kind of a setup where,
We'll talk with them outside of the meet. workshop
Okay.
yet. During.
but I think that would be a good thing to have us all at the same table.
Councilmember Debner?
One thought I had is I really like the idea of, you know, kind of the first meeting being like a larger one. I imagine we'll probably receive public comment and input like Morrison. But maybe we could also have a big meeting in front, but also like a recap. Just so that way there's kind of like two big meetings that, you know, the public's has on their schedule where they can attend at the start and at the end before we formally like take action. So that's just one idea that I had. I'm not sure what.
What if using the word recap it makes me think about this. What if in addition, at the first reading, we will certainly go through, here's the process that we went through to get to this first reading. So in a way that I think that meets what you're talking about. But what if at each of these meetings, after the workshop, we did a summary of where council landed and got that out to the community? So that then even if people aren't attending the meetings and participating in that way, they can share their thoughts reading the summary. And maybe at some point in the process, there could be sort of an opportunity for feedback from the last meeting. Because I don't think the goal is to just go fast. I think the goal is to get us to the end with something the community agrees with.
Austin has a comment.
Let's hear from Austin. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes.
Cool. So if you look at your project schedule, the one that's in the packet, you'll see in the timeline, the first meeting we do the overview of the project and the zoning districts. And then we move on to permitted uses and then development standards, procedures. And the last work session is the consolidated draft. So it's putting all of those things together. In other words, the project is set up so that we do the overview in the first work session, along with our first chapter in the new land use code, which will be your zoning districts. And then you're moving from there, from the ground up of development. So the idea is that each one of these sessions.
Just a minute, Austin. We're trying to get hear you in the room. When you were first talking, we had you mic'd well, and then you faded away a little bit. Can
Oh,
you say the last couple of sentences again?
yeah, no worries. So the
Still
idea is that this project,
worse.
it's getting worse. Okay.
Try again.
Just a minute. Okay, try again.
Can you hear me now?
Nope.
No.
It has to do with, there's a flaw in Zoom that is not allowing us to mic the sound directly from Zoom into our speakers.
Oh, yes, it's the audio settings. It's remove the noise removal on Zoom. If you go into audio and then unclick noise removal.
Try again.
Can you hear me now?
No. Can you
Okay.
call me and I'll put the phone up to the mic? That worked last time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Go ahead. Ah. Can you hear me? Yeah. I've got it on speaker.
Maybe it's something with my voice.
There it is. Go. You finally, it's coming through. Go ahead. You have the floor.
Okay, right on. Okay, so when you look at the project schedule in your packet, this project is analyzed from the ground up. In other words, we're going to be taking the view of a developer and how you build out a new project. So first, we're going to start with an overview of the entire code. And we're going to talk about the overview of the project, of how each workshop is going to be sort of oriented, and how we'll go about making decisions to keep the process moving along while still getting public input along the way. So we'll start with our zoning districts and we'll build up from there: permitted uses, development standards, procedures. And then once we finish all of that work, each session building on the last, we'll end with a consolidated work session. So what that means is, in that draft, you're bringing everything together. And you have an opportunity in that work session before first reading to go through all of the decisions you made all along the way, to maybe say, hey, something that we decided in the middle, now that I'm looking at it, I want to go back to that because I think a later decision affected that in a way I wasn't thinking about at the time I made the initial decision. So it's already built into the process. So in other words, we're not going to plan on starting every work session saying, hey, here's a recap of what we did last time. Do you have any other thoughts? Because in my opinion, if you do that, we're going to really get dragged down and we're probably going to lose the plot a little bit. But if you're able to be confident in the decisions you make in each meeting and know that each one is going to build on the next, and then you have a chance at the very end to say, hold on, I think we might have missed something here in the middle, or hold on, we want to relook at something we decided in the middle. You have that opportunity. It's built in.
Thank you. That's helpful. Let's make the consolidated work session longer. That'll help.
Yeah.
Does that help, Council? Councilmember Debner?
Is there flexibility built into the schedule in the event that, we do receive a lot of public participation, that we can kind of adjust it? I guess I'm just wondering, how flexible is the schedule once we adopt it?
It's not adopted by resolution. It's just approved by council. So there is some flexibility in it, but the goal is to get us to the end on time.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lasher.
I just wanted to say that aren't we doing the 5:30 work session and starting our meetings at 6:30? So if we have a different setup, just because I've helped set this up, but I know how long it does take moving things around, like I just feel like it'd be more efficient to have like in a setup, everyone can speak for as many times as they'd like, so they can be included, but having it set up and then having to tear it down, it's going to take 15 minutes. So then it's going to push us even
You're
later.
exactly right. That's a really good point. That answers that question, really. Mayor Pro Tem.
What if we had a specific web page that was dedicated to this project, embedded into the town website? So just start a new page. Maybe it's on the Public Works, or I'm not sure where, but just to have a page dedicated to this entire project.
I've actually already created that page. I
Oh.
just haven't advertised it yet. And it's coming out in the Gazette. Unfortunately, it has all the prior dates. So everybody who gets the Gazette and is using those dates, update the dates. When we update them again, I will update the page. I'm glad I didn't publish the web page to everybody yet. But we do have a web page that is a project page that will keep everybody informed on that page.
Love it.
Okay, that helps me a lot. Because planning this project, I want us to be successful. I don't want to just get us through the project. I want us to be successful. And I just needed that discussion from all of council so that we're moving forward with agreement about what the goals are and understanding about how it's going to work. Thank you. Councilmember Debner.
I noticed, so the February 23rd, that's a fourth Monday of the month. Is that intended? Whereas the rest of the scheduled dates are all fall on the third Monday.
Yes, that's because the third Monday is a holiday and the office is closed that day. And so we moved it to the fourth. Councilmember Unger.
Just one quick thing, since we're going from 5:30 to 6:30, and everything else has been from 6:30 on, do you think that's wise to make it start at 5:30, even though would be convenient and starting earlier, but yet everything else has been 6:30 start?
Because we're going straight to our meetings after at 6:30.
Yeah, this is a
Okay.
special project just for these meetings, starting it early so that we can get to our regular business at the normal time.
Okay.
Other questions? Councilmember Debner.
Would there be any concern from council about our community being a regular rhythm of a 6:30 start time? But if we're starting early and, considering people working, I'm just curious if anyone has any thoughts about that, if it's maybe better to start at 6:30 and just push our regular meeting back a little.
Councilmember Lasher.
I think when we talked about this at the last meeting, we said that if we started at 6:30, then we'd be going till 10:30. And I thought the council, I'm fine because I'd rather stay up late. But I think as the council decided, starting at 5:30, so then we wouldn't be here going till 10:30, 11.
And staff as well.
Yeah.
Because our regular business is going to continue. Councilmember Algeen.
Would we, as we move forward, would we have some flexibility with that as we involve the public? If they say that the 5:30 is a difficult time and they want to participate, but they can't, and that we may need to adjust time for better participation?
Council
Is
gets
that-
to make this call, but council is making this decision now. So I would encourage us to make the decision and stick with it because consistency, in my experience, is what proves helpful rather than constantly adjusting, because we might hear from residents who say, this is difficult for me, but we might not hear from other residents who have already adjusted their calendar and had it put on their calendar and then they don't realize that we changed it. Like, I feel like we should make the commitment to the dates and times and hopefully get that word out and then not change it so that we create a consistency for this project. But again, council is council, so you guys are the ones making this decision. I don't think it would be wise to play around with the calendar once we get it nailed down. Councilmember Unger?
I see your point, but, and you do a good job when you're putting out things of highlighting certain areas that need to be highlighted. So this would have to be please note the new time in
Mhm.
bold or something, and it's going to stay this time throughout this project. That would be helpful.
Okay. Councilmember Debner?
I guess after hearing discussion, I'm in support of the 5:30 start time. This really is kind of like a special project, so I think the community would probably be understanding of an earlier start time.
It is very much a special project. Mayor Pro Tem?
So say a resident isn't able to attend the 5:30 session, but there's still going to be plenty of opportunity to weigh in because this is still going to have to be, go through first and second reading. So it's not like there's not going to be an opportunity for public comment because every meeting has public comment periods. And also, there's 2 readings as well that will be during a normal business meeting at 6:30.
And the consolidated work session, as our town attorney pointed out.
Right. Okay.
Okay? Great. Thank you. That's really helpful. I think we landed in a good place and we'll get the dates updated on the calendar and we'll update the project page on the website and get the information out to the community. Thank you, Austin. Therefore, I think we've completed our agenda and I can hear a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
We are hereby adjourned at 7:30 PM. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
It's awesome.
That was fast.
I know, it's so nice.